But for now, let's talk about the American Tomahawk. Just the mention that Donald Trump might give these cruise missiles to Ukraine caused hysteria in the Kremlin. And there are hints that the momentum to end the war, which was achieved in Alaska, has been exhausted. So why is this legendary symbol of American power so terrifying? Let's explain briefly. First of all, the Tomahawk is fast. Let's start with that. It races toward its target at extremely low altitudes, down to 50 meters, maneuvering around the terrain. And its turbojet engine leaves no heat signature. The missile can carry different types of warheads depending on the target: anti-ship, cluster, and bunker busting. Perhaps that's why Zelensky told Axios that Kremlin officials should find out where the nearest shelters are located. Since its debut in the 1980s, the Tomahawk has undergone numerous modifications. There are up to 8,000 of these missiles stored in US warehouses. But the main reason the Kremlin got nervous is that the Tomahawk can carry a nuclear payload. The missile appeared at the height of the Cold War as a deterrent weapon, but turned out to be one of the most effective. It has a range of up to 1,800 kilometers. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War have calculated that within the Tomahawk's range, there are at least 1,945 Russian military targets. These include the Shahed drone manufacturing plant in Yelabuga, as well as the Engels 2 air base, from which 295 bombers take off. And as for Putin's personal fear, they can easily reach him personally in his bunker under the Kremlin. The question is, where would the Tomahawks be launched from? Because these missiles were originally created for the US Navy, so they could only be launched from ships and submarines. However, right now, there are land-based launchers across the ocean that can be mounted directly onto a truck. The US Marines gave up on them because they had poor mobility on soft ground, that is, on beaches where they were supposed to land. As for transferring Tomahawks to Ukraine, Donald Trump did not give a definitive yes, but neither did he say a firm no. President Zelensky also did not hear a clear answer from the American leader at their last meeting. Moreover, the Tomahawks are nearing the end of their service life, and using them in war is much more cost-effective than disposing of them. So what is this new way of putting pressure on the Kremlin? And how effective is it? KTS correspondent Natalia Fibrig on the main intrigues of the week in international politics.
The Tomahawks have picked up speed. That's exactly how the outcome of yesterday's conversation between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky could be summed up. The conversation lasted about 30 minutes, but its results could change everything, and for a long time to come. At the very least, the president of Ukraine called it very positive and productive, and an American publication shared some details. Citing sources in the White House, it reported that the main topic was, in fact, long-range missiles for Ukraine. One of the most likely options is to allow NATO partners to acquire Tomahawks and transfer them to Ukraine with American approval. In Kyiv, preparations are already underway for a visit by a Ukrainian delegation to Washington. The delegation will be led by Yulia Sviridenko and Andriy Yermak. It is possible that the technical aspects of the agreements will be discussed there. Kyiv is conveying to Washington that this capability could force Putin to come to the negotiating table. It is known that during the conversation, Zelensky appealed to Trump's triumph in the Middle East. The day before in Israel, Trump's special envoy Vitkov was already being cheered with chants of "Thank you, Trump," because he predicts that all Israeli hostages will be released as early as Monday or Tuesday. Zelensky told the US president that if it was possible to stop the war there, then it is possible to stop the Russian one as well. And perhaps the fact that the Nobel Committee did not award Trump the most prestigious peace prize will only push him to prove to the whole world that he is the main peacemaker, and that the jury is simply unfair. Because Trump's resentment could have very real political consequences.
I stopped wars. If it had been someone else, they would have received 5 Nobel Prizes. They didn't even mention me, and I wouldn't have received it because I'm a different person. And the fake news treats me completely differently than other people. Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize even though he hadn't done anything. He said, "Why did I get it?" He had no idea. It happened right away, practically immediately after he became president. He didn't do anything.
The decision to provide American weapons to Ukraine would be supported by the majority of US citizens. According to polls, 70% of Americans support continuing military aid to Ukraine. Therefore, this is a direct political benefit for the authorities, whose approval rating, according to recent polls, has dropped to a new low. Still, the main support is currently coming from Europe, and the continent is going through some of its most challenging times in recent weeks, facing crises and attempts to undermine pro-Ukrainian politicians. France, one of Ukraine's main strongholds in Europe, has gone through yet another government crisis. Sébastien Lecornu's cabinet lasted only 14 hours. a kind of anti-record in French history. This is already the third government resignation in a year. Political turbulence is hitting Macron hard and is seriously distracting Paris from the external threat posed by the Kremlin. The Czech Republic may change its course and move closer to the positions of Slovakia or Hungary. Andrej Babiš, whose party won the elections, will likely form a government with two right-wing populist parties that actively promote Eurosceptic and pro-Russian narratives. He says that aid to Ukraine should now be provided only through the EU and not directly. And the main threat here is the cancellation of the well-known ammunition initiative. The president of Ukraine has already spoken with the election winner by phone, and the latest statements from the possible next Czech prime minister regarding Ukraine have become milder. Meanwhile, in Brussels, there was a real attack on Ursula von der Leyen. The European Parliament has considered a vote of no confidence in the European Commission twice in 1 week. Nothing like this has happened in decades. The far left accused her of having too soft a stance on Israel, while the right, often called Orban's allies, criticized her for a failed migration policy. Both attempts failed, and von der Leyen remained in office with a comfortable majority of votes. But these attacks only showed that the internal pressure on the EU leadership is continuing to grow. Meanwhile, in Strasbourg, European Commission President von der Leyen delivered one of her toughest speeches. She stated that Europe is already under attack and in a state of hybrid war. Von der Leyen reminded the deputies that in recent weeks, undersea cables in the EU have been cut, airports have been paralyzed by cyber attacks, and elections have become targets of hostile special operations. According to her, this is a deliberate strategy to destabilize society, test European resolve, and weaken support for Ukraine.
These are not random acts of harassment. This is a consistent and escalating campaign aimed at destabilizing our citizens, testing our resolve, dividing our alliance, and weakening our support for Ukraine. And it's time to call it what it is. This is hybrid warfare, and we must take it very seriously.
It seems the European Parliament listened and immediately adopted a resolution calling for the shooting down of Russian drones and aircraft that violate EU airspace. And here, Ukraine's experience becomes invaluable. This is also being discussed in Germany, which is already changing its own legislation to make it easier to respond to drone provocations.
We must ask Ukraine to share its experience with us. We have already done this, and it works in exchanges between ministries, as well as between police agencies.
At the same time, Europe is preparing a kind of financial tomahawk, the use of frozen Russian assets. Brussels understands that funding from the United States has slowed down, while Ukraine needs to keep its economy and defense afloat right now. That is why the European Commission is developing a mechanism for so-called reparations loans. This would be an interest-free loan of about 140 billion euros secured by frozen Russian assets. Ukraine would only be required to repay this money once Russia compensates for the damages caused by the war. In fact, these are reparations paid in advance.
I will support any approach that will allow the use of Russian assets to further assist Ukraine and ensure the swiftest possible end to this war. There is a high level of consensus within the European political community regarding the continuation of this course of action. He should not underestimate our determination.
In the EU, about 200 billion euros of Russian central bank assets are currently frozen, and this signal will definitely be felt in Moscow. So next week, we expect more details about American long-range weapons, as well as about a new package of European sanctions against Russia, which Europe plans to agree upon at the summit on October 22nd through 23rd in Brussels. Because while Russia continues to strike at Ukraine's energy system, some European countries are increasing their purchases of Russian energy resources and are paying Moscow more than they spend on aid to Ukraine. And by the way, Donald Trump also likes to mention this. And a positive development regarding the Tomahawks could trigger another effect. It could convince Europe, and Germany in particular, to finally unlock the Taurus missiles, which are still kept under lock and key. From Berlin, Natalia Fibrig and Denis Savchenko. Tesen Tisden, 1+1 Marathon, United News.